221. Hashtag fallacy education at Mr. Krim 3, hashtag VerseTV 221D.
I was speaking to a group of kids today, elementary age, and I was reading my affirmation book to them. The first part of my book talks about how we're all from Africa. And after I said that, a young black boy, he raised his hand and he said, "Man, Africa is poor, ain't it?" And I immediately correct him and we went to some of the parts of my book that actually talk about African people, specifically Mansa Musa. How was it that anti-Africanness is this generational things that even young children in this day and age can understand the same way we did growing up when our view of Africa was through the prism, through the lens of Feed My Starving Children commercials? This speaks to why those Florida Black History standards that teach that African people benefited from slavery by learning skills is so dangerous, and here's why. Because if you take that child and put him in a Black History course in Florida and teach him that African people who were enslaved benefited from it because they learned skills, and juxtapose that to the belief that they already have that Africa has nothing to offer to the world, he will then subconsciously learn and believe that he himself, as a black young man or an African young man, has nothing to offer the world, and neither do people who look like him, unless we are in a subservient position to whiteness. Because if we could so-called learn skills from white folks while enslaved, then what does it mean to be treated as a second-class citizen today outside of the shackles? That's a dangerous mindset to have, y'all. That's why we must teach our kids what they brought with them when they were forced to America.
Yeah, and that's part of why I kind of think we might remember to double back to these taxi cabs. But I will say, as far as that, my initial reaction is connected with my connection, in that that was a new connection for me, to the extent that I did not think about the fact that Florida having this law of not, well, putting in the school curriculum that slaves actually learned valuable skills for themselves, valuable personal skills for themselves. That's problematic, because then when you couple that with the negative perception of Africa, that makes it seem like slavery was actually a benefit to them, because it's like, well, they learned something that they wouldn't have known back home in the jungle. So it's it was worth it for them, personally, for them, kind of like, and I'm gonna trigger some of us with this, but kind of like, I think it was, I kind of remember who it is, but I don't want to mention her name. But the woman who was like talking about Hurricane Katrina, and she was like, well, honestly, a lot of them getting those um, lean to homes that were created for them, they're living better now than they were before. Anyway, but yeah, I realized that some people might not be aware of that issue with that being added to the curriculum, but I believe that some people are, and some people are quite satisfied with that outcome. And when he mentioned in his age group, and I believe he is around our age group as well, at least a fellow 80s baby, he was like, yeah, my growing up, our perception of Africa was just starvation and absolute nothingness. And it was the same with me growing up with Sally Struthers and the jokes about all the bugs over the African children and all of that. And that's the kind of thing that made a guy who was in my singing group years ago say, you know what, I'm not going to lie. Like, slavery was awful for our ancestors, but I'm kind of glad for it because at least we're not over there. And it's like, that's what the perception is. That's the perception that people have. And really quickly, I'll say it also reminded me of that. Well, I'll just go into this as my 1 minute, right quick. The debate, Twitter debate that I had with the dude in Egypt telling me that Egyptians are white. And it's like, I remember he said to me, he's like, you're just mad because Black people have contributed nothing to the global society except how to twerk. And because I didn't really know my history very well, or much less back then, I didn't know how to counter that other than just being hurt. And I was like, well, what are you? That's not true. Anyway, my one sentence is, man, and I was just talking with an Uber driver about this morning. I talk to Uber drivers a whole lot, y'all. Mansa Musa is the wealthiest person ever from the region that is today known as Mali. Mansa Musa is the wealthiest person ever. But our very curated history doesn't tell us any of that because our history is curated to have us understand, our understanding be the only thing that Black people have contributed to the global society is twerking. It really hurt me when he said that. And because I really didn't know how to respond at that time. Anyway, nowadays I can be like, well, we can, part of our contribution is the wealthiest man in history to this date, Mansa Musa, but okay, all right, anyway. But yeah. Did you want to say anything? You don't have to.
Yeah, I was curious. When you were saying the wealthiest man in the world was in, you say was Mali?
In the region that is today known as Mali. Because we have to acknowledge that Africa was divided up with, anyway, but yes, in the region today known as Mali.
And around when was he alive?
Oh, years ago, like well before slavery. Actually, his brother, either his brother or his nephew or somebody really close to him, actually explored America, explored the West before Columbus. But we don't hear about that either. Anyway.
Oh, I know. Christopher Columbus was not the first person to come to, well, at that time was referred to as the New World.
Yeah. But that's how the story goes. Yeah. Anyway.
Well, I was just gonna say